Well, welcome back. It is great to see you making it. You are plowing through a lot of material, and I get it. But the thing is you're going to be able to return back to this material at your church, and I hope you do as you start to be thinking through, how can I work on a plan for every person in my church so they have an end in mind? How can I work on a healthy group by balancing the biblical purposes? And how can I have a strategy to help my church take the steps it needs to? So again, I know you're doing a lot, but I just want to say, exhale a little bit, because you're into that final stretch. And in this session, we're going to talk to you about one of the most critical parts of this whole plan. We're going to be talking about, how do you move from making friends to reaching friends? You know, when statistically you look at so many surveys that are done in churches, is evangelism tends to be the scary piece for followers of Christ. And the irony of that is, it is one of the greatest things that we have to tell people. And I told you earlier on how myself and my wife were both first-generation Christians. And I think, what would it have been like if somebody wouldn't have shed the gospel to us and shared the gospel and brought the light? You know, what would that have been like? And so with you and your church, what I want to do is help you out by helping you to understand how important this is. Because this world is made up of broken people, and you just may not realize it. They may look nice on the outside, but they're carrying a lot of baggage on the inside. This session is not only relevant to Lisa and I because we're first-generation Christians, but also because we are both passionate that we can do evangelism and do it relationally. We can do it in a way where God sometimes uses us to plant a seed. Sometimes He uses us to water a seed. And if we are just blessed enough, sometimes we get to harvest that seed and watch somebody come to know Christ, right there with us. And as I look at this session, probably the most important piece about this session is when you look at the 5 biblical purposes. When you look all through the Great Commission and the Great Commandment, and when we get to the other side, the only biblical purpose that we can't do is evangelism. Now, if you get to the other side and you can do evangelism, you're in a bad place. But what you want to be able to say is to say, hey, if I can't do evangelism on the other side, let's do it on this side. God designed us to do evangelism on this side so that on the other side we'd have fellowship with Him. We could worship with Him. We could learn from Him. We can serve in heaven. So let's jump into this material. Now again, let me remind you, when we talked about ministry was believer to believer. This session, evangelism, is believer to unbeliever. So let's jump into the first point here. Pray to the Lord of the harvest to send forth workers. Now, when you read that, if you've been a Christian for any amount of time and you hear pray to the Lord of the harvest, it can sound very trite. It can sound like a rote prayer. It can sound like when people just say, hey, I'm praying for you. But what I want to do is I want to show you this picture. Now, when you look at that picture, you'll see my kiddos. You'll see Erica and my son, Ethan. You'll also see our dog in the picture there, and his name is Lucifer. And not really, but he just role plays Lucifer. And just such a blessing to us. But, and don't send me any emails. I get the dog lovers, and I love dogs too, just not mine. But anyways, the reason why I show you that picture is because when, from the moment those kids were conceived, I prayed for their salvation. Actually, not from the moment they were conceived. That was a different prayer. But from the moment I knew that my wife was pregnant, I would pray for their salvation. I would literally every day lay my hand on Lisa's stomach and I would say, this is a simple prayer. Father, you've given us the gift of life. I pray that this child is born healthy. I pray, Lord, that this is a smooth pregnancy. I pray that, this child would come to know you at an early age and would do much damage to the kingdom of darkness. And from the moment they were born, I would have the honor of every night, as long as I'm not physically traveling, but every night I get the honor to pray with my kids at night and to walk through, what God has done in their life in that particular day. And I do the same type of prayer. I would be able to say, just pray with them and just, ask God to bless them and ask God just to touch their hearts and come to know Him at a young age, or that they come to know Jesus at a young age, and that they would do much damage to the kingdom of darkness. And looking at this now, decades later, it is so awesome as a dad just to know that both my kids have accepted Christ. Both of them have followed Christ in baptism, and they're serving God as best they can. And you can say, well, what does that have to do with this? Because one day I was walking through my cul-de-sac. And, it was one of those John 21 times. Do you remember in John 21 where Jesus talks to Peter and says, Peter, do you love my sheep? He says, oh, yes, I do. He says, feed my lambs. And he does it 3 times. And it's like this dialogue that's happening. And the piece that I had is that I had this conversation with the Holy Spirit. And it's like, this was before my kids had accepted Christ, but it was one of those things where he says, hey, do you want your kids to go to heaven? And I'm like going, Lord, I want my kids to go ahead of heaven. And it's like, do you really want to go to heaven? I'm like going, God, I'd do anything for my kids to know that my kids would be in heaven with eternity with me. It's like, do you really, really, really want your kids to go to heaven? I'm just like going, I would lay down my life if I knew it would guarantee I'd see my kids for eternity. And then I felt the Holy Spirit just working on me. Do you love your neighbors that much that you have the same passion for them? And it caught me off guard to a point where I honestly was saying, some yes, maybe some no. You know what I'm thinking, Lord. And I kind of was joining my Calvinist brotherhood, and I was like, going, well, some are destined. So it was one of those moments where I just kind of was going through this thing, and what I realized is that if I would pray for my neighbors, the people I interface with, like I pray for my children, I may see a little bit different results. And it led me to realize that this whole passage of talking about, like in Matthew 9:37 there, where it says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. I'm one of those few. Because I cared about my little neck of the woods, but God's given me so much more. I remember talking to one of my buddies who grew up in the Midwest, and he said we had this line that was always saying, you farm to the fence line. Well, I'm like going, well, that makes sense. But yet so many of us as believers, we don't farm to the fence line. I was farming inside my house. I wasn't even thinking about my cul-de-sac. I wasn't even thinking about the people I see day in and day out. And so it led me to a whole new place where it was a revelation, almost kind of like in the 2 Corinthians passage right here, where it says, all this is from God, who reconciled us to Himself through Christ and gave us a ministry of reconciliation. I realized that part of my leaning was to go further than my house, go further than the few people I knew, but was able to go to a place where I map my neighborhood. I map my neighborhood. When I first, came on, when this first happened, I was living on one cul-de-sac, and I'm going to walk you through this a little bit later on, but there were 16 homes. We owned one of them, and I prayed for 15 homes like I prayed for my children. And in the same way, I live on a different cul-de-sac now. It has 10 homes. We own one of them, so we pray for 9 homes like I prayed for my children. And if you can kind of take that same piece of realizing if we prayed for those that aren't our bloodline, like we pray for those that are bloodline, how much will happen and how bigger this whole piece on prayer will start to get a hold of us. Look at this piece that Pastor Rick Warren talks about in The Purpose-Driven Life. And he labeled it, the Great Commission. He said, this commission was given to every follower of Jesus, not to the pastors and missionaries alone. This is your commission from Jesus, and it is not optional. These words of Jesus are not the great suggestion. Is that awesome? That's a great line. It's not the great suggestion. If you are part of God's family, your mission is mandatory. To ignore it would be disobedience. You are the only Christian some people will ever know, and your mission is to share Jesus with them. Now, question. Is the Great Commission the Great Commission to you, or in reality, is it the Great Suggestion? I know none of us would say, oh yeah, I'm going to raise my hand and say it's a great suggestion. But do our actions reflect the Great Commission, or do our actions reflect the Great Suggestion? You'll know it pretty easy by just trying to figure out who is it that you want to bring to heaven. Now, if you're like most followers of Christ, the longer you're a Christian, the fewer non-Christians you know. So you have to do two tactical things in this. One is you have to, make sure you are bumping into non-Christians. So like when I moved to my neighborhood about 3 years ago, it wasn't like my first neighborhood where all the kids piled out onto the cul-de-sac and everyone was out there so I could meet them. But these people were more reclused. And I was like going, wow, this is going to take a little bit more effort. So literally, and you can probably say, I'm a stalker or something like that. But, literally, I would wait and get the mail when I saw somebody else go get the mail. And say, hi, I'm new to the neighborhood. Obviously, you haven't welcomed me. No, I didn't say that. But, I would just, start to introduce myself and, say how I was doing. I mean, I had to almost use reverse welcome wagon because the neighborhood was just a little bit more to themselves. To the point now where I've gotten to know them and got some great stories, but I'll tell you a little bit later on. So first thing is you got to get to know unbelievers. I don't care what that's going to take. Now, don't take it to the extreme. If you're dealing with alcoholism, don't say, well, I've got to go to the bar to meet unbelievers, or I got to go to the strip club to meet unbelievers. There's plenty of other opportunities to meet unbelievers. Think about all the places you go to frequently. The grocery store, the dry cleaner, the gas station, wherever it is, your sports clubs for kids, classes you may take, your work, your neighborhood. There's plenty of people you can start to interface with, but start to pray for them like you really care. Now, another thing you need to do is you need to hang around new believers. Now, that's a little bit trickier too sometimes for us, but one of the things I love to do at Saddleback is when at our church we have baptism at the end of every service. And one of the things that we love to do is have people share their testimonies, and you just get to hear the story of what God's done in their lives. One of the things I love to do is just hang around the water's edge and see everything that God has done. Being a pastor for, like I said, a little over 30 years, it is so wonderful being in the water with people and hearing their testimonies. I mean, I've baptized thousands of people, and probably every one of their stories are etched on my heart. One of the stories I love was Mabel, who got baptized because her story was that she got saved on Good Friday at our church. And I wasn't even baptizing, I just happened to be at the water's edge, but she was sharing her story. And it was just great because she was 100 years old, 100, and got saved on Good Friday. Now, the beautiful thing is that a few weeks later, she had her baptism, and she had a sign that said, I almost missed it. Tell me that doesn't motivate you. Tell me that doesn't get you excited to do that. I mean, I had one guy who came up. I could tell he was clutching something the whole time. When I was baptizing him, I thought he was just nervous or something like that. But after I baptized him, he walked right out of the water and took a knee down. And because he wanted to get his life cleaned up before he proposed to his girlfriend, and just knelt right there and proposed to her and asked her to marry him. Now, she said no. No, just kidding. Just kidding. She said yes, and it was a great time. In the 30 plus years I've been doing baptisms, I have only had this encountered once, but I was baptizing one guy, and his toupee came off. And, it takes a lot to paralyze me in the water, but it was one of those things where, he was like going, "Jesus lives," and I'm just like going, "Oh, you're old." So, it was one of those weird things. But the awkward thing was it was floating between us, and I wasn't quite too sure what to do. And so I just kind of said, "Hey, this is yours." It's cute because his son came up to me afterwards and said, "So let me get this straight. My dad went down a young man and came up an old man." And I said, "The theology doesn't work, but that is factual." But anyways, you want to pray. You want to stay focused. You want to get together with non-believers. Number 2. Be sensitive to the needs of your neighborhood. Be sensitive to the needs of your neighborhood. One of the things I want you to write down in your course booklet right there is learn to cross the street before you cross the sea. Learn to cross the street before you cross the sea. Now, nothing against foreign missions. I'm all for that, but I find that sometimes it's easier for us to jump on a plane than it is to walk across the street. And one of the things I would challenge you with is that God has given every one of us, whether you live in an apartment complex or a high-rise or on a farm or in suburbia, in the urban, I don't care where you live, you generally have people around you. And what I would encourage you to do is somehow start to get to know the people by mapping your neighborhood. It was interesting to me. One time I was doing a 3-day conference on evangelism, and I was one of the speakers, and I was the first of 3 speakers, and I kind of did this exercise there. I was talking about mapping your neighborhood, and I saw a guy in the front row. He was kind of nodding with me, and he was following along with me and everything like that. Seemed like a good guy, and I just called him up during my session. I said, "Hey, come on up here and map your neighborhood." And he couldn't really do it, and so I tried to help him out. I go, "Well, you on a street, on a cul-de-sac, whatever?" And he goes, "A street." So he drew a street on the board and drew a house, and I said, "You got to have neighbors." And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, do you know their names? And he goes, "Not really." And I tried to help him out, and I said, "Well, how long have you lived there?" And he goes, 9 years. And I said, "Oh, wow, that's tough." But and anyway, so we kind of moved on, and he really didn't know what he was doing. And I said, "Hey, you know what? If we surveyed most people in this room, most of you don't know your neighbors like you wish you did." So I said, "Give the guy a hand," and he went on down, and I went on with my session. And he came up to me afterwards, and he just said, he came up after I finished the session, and he said, "Hey, you really embarrassed me." And I said, "Hey, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Most people don't know how to map their neighborhood, and please don't feel shame or disgrace. And it wasn't my intent." And he goes, No, you don't get it. You really embarrassed me." And I said, "You know what? I'm really sorry. I'll refund your money. I'm just sorry." And he goes, "No, you are not getting this. I am mortified." And I go, "Hey, I'm the first of 3 speakers. The sucky one always goes first." I go, "The next 2 will be better. Hang along. I know God will do something incredible in your life." And he goes, "You don't get this. I'm the next speaker." And I went, "Oh." I go, "I'd be embarrassed." Now, to his credit, he got up and he walked over to his piece of the neighborhood that he tried to draw, and he said, "I will never, ever let this happen again, where I've been teaching it so much that I haven't been doing it." And in the same way, where I would want to challenge you is to think through that whole piece about saying to yourself, I'll care about what I believe. Sometimes we get so used to being a Christian, we forget that what God called us to was to share the good news and share your story. And I want to encourage you just to be able to do that same thing. You know, as you start to look at your neighborhood, like I've looked at my neighborhood, you know, incredible things can happen over time. You know, and I wish I had time to tell you every story, but literally, if we could sit down over coffee, I could draw both my cul-de-sacs, my old house and my new house, and I could, you know, I could tell you the names of every person and the people that lived there. But the cool piece is that in my first neighborhood, we saw 7 families come to know Christ. Not because of anything that I did. I'm not a great evangelist, but God just brought the right time. More times than not, it was a crisis than anything else. But sometimes God just gave us the ability at Christmas and Easter and saying, hey, come along. And I just planted a seed. Somebody else did the watering and somebody else did the harvesting, but they would come back and say, you know, I found Christ. One guy that I'll tell you on the story just so you can kind of be encouraged. When I first met him on our cul-de-sac, I just went up and I said, hey, my name is Steve. And he goes, I'm not going to church. And I said, oh, that's great to know. But my name is Steve. What was your name? I didn't quite catch it. And he goes, oh, hey, my name's Brett. And we started a dialogue. And he goes, I want you to know, I'm not going to church. And I said, it's okay. You don't have to go to church. But the beautiful thing is that over the next 5 years, we built a relationship. And through that relationship, we just, you know, we did things. We played volleyball, we talked on the cul-de-sac, we talked kids, we talked marriage, we talked a number of different things, and never pushed him towards Christ. But one Monday, I thought I was late for work, and really it was God was wanting me to have perfect timing. And Brett met me out on my driveway and he said, hey, can you talk? And I said, yeah, sure. And I go, do you want to talk now or you want to talk later? And he goes, I think my wife is going to divorce me today. And I said, we'll talk now. And to fast forward a story, in a Starbucks with a guy 5 years earlier who would say, I would never go to church. I had a guy in a very public setting say, I would love to pray to receive Christ right now. And fast forward the story about 4 years. He has cleaned up his life. He lost his marriage, but he's cleaned up his life. He's done an incredible job, you know, working towards, you know, restoration and being a good dad. He volunteers in our children's ministry with his kid. He's just a great guy. But it all started from a relationship with that. You know, one of the best compliments I get on my cul-de-sac is when people say, I never would have pegged you as a pastor. And that's not because, you know, like I'm doing drugs or, you know, doing stuff with them at parties or anything like that. It's just because I'm not fitting the typical box of what they think a Christian is. And what I would encourage you to do, matter of fact, I'm not even going to encourage you. I want you to do it right now. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I want you to draw your neighborhood right now. Just flip a page over, find a blank page. What I want you to do is I just want you to draw your street, draw your cul-de-sac, draw your high-rise, and just start to identify how many people do you want to try to get to know. Not lead to Jesus. How many people do you just want to get to know over the next few months? So we're going to pause right now. I want you to jump in. Okay, so no matter how much of your neighborhood you knew or how much you didn't know, here's what I want to say. Don't take shame, don't take guilt, don't feel bad. The thing that I want to encourage you is get to know what you know and start to move it further. If you knew everybody in your area, well, that's great. Now start to get to know their spiritual story and dial that up a little bit. Start to be able to move to a place where you can have them over for dinner or go to coffee, so you can build a relationship, so you can find out, where are they at in their journey towards finding Christ. The other thing I want to let you know is that this is something that can be done by anybody. There's a boy named Colton who was 4 years old. And Colton was in one of our children's ministries classes and challenged just like you were challenged, a little bit differently, but it was just simply, who's somebody that you would like to wish that you could invite to church or take to heaven with you? And Colton, at the age of 4, said his best friend Danny. And now Danny was the child of a single parent mom who lived on our cul-de-sac. And the way the story winds out is that Colton invites Danny to church. And his mom is embarrassed that somebody else would take him to church, so she takes Danny to church. And, they meet up with Colton, they go to their class, and then she just goes to church with the family because she knew him. And the great thing was, you fast forward the story 6 months, and then this mom accepts Christ. It was so cute because she, ran down to me. And she says, hey, I visited your church, and I didn't know if this was a good or a bad thing yet. But then she started to tell her story, and it was a very, very good thing. But what made the story even better is as these boys grew up, I think they were 9 or 10, both Danny and Colton said, hey, we're ready to make a public statement that we're followers of Christ, and would you baptize us? And up on the screen, this is the picture of Danny and Colton and I at their baptism. But it was just a great moment and a great of many stories that you'll start to see as you start to just build simple relationships. All right, number 3. 3, sharing starts with caring. Sharing starts with caring. And this is another just a piece of the puzzle of just being able to say, don't forget what you were like when you didn't know Christ. Because somebody had to care about you and then share with you. Now, what I want you to be able to do is start to think through, again, if every one of your small groups starts to do this exercise of the neighborhood, just like you're going to do this next exercise, which automatically all the people that, are introverts are going, oh, I don't want to do another one. But hang on, you'll survive. Or the rapture will happen and God will take you out. But anyways, the thing is that God brings people to your mind. And what I want you to do is do a quick exercise. And if you'll notice right there, is that sharing starts with caring kind of is broken up into 3 categories. There's your intentional plan, where you can kind of catch people, you can kind of say, hey, there's family members I want to pray for, there's friends, there's people that I work with, there's people I have fun with or fellowship, there's different people that I hang with, but there's also sometimes a spontaneous plan that happens in your heart. And very few times, but there have been those times when God has laid somebody on my heart and I have sought them out and just said, God put you on my heart, what's up? And it was very spontaneous. They weren't on my mind, they weren't on my roadmap, but God wanted me to be able to be an instrument to touch that person's life. And then there's the providential things that happen. And those are just, have you ever met somebody, a complete stranger, and it was at the right place at the right time? I can remember I was on a flight just not too long ago, and I was talking to a lady. There's a group of us, and we struck up a conversation with a lady going in the elevator towards our flight. And we thought, oh, wouldn't that be cool, But it was she was fun, and she was in interacting with us. And so it was just a fun time. Well, then we were getting on our flight and we were standing in line to check our baggage, and she was right behind us. I was like going, maybe God's up to something. And so we talked again, and we dialed it up a little bit more, and invited her at that time to, our church was putting on a movie called Home Run, and invited her to go to a theater to see that in her hometown. And then I got on the plane, and you guessed it, she sat right beside me. And so I just went to her and I said, you know what? I've been in ministry too long to know that God doesn't give us 3 opportunities by mistake. What's going on in your life? And she just broke down there on a long flight and just said, there's some relational things and there's just different things that were happening. Trust me, that was providential. Nothing about me. Don't go, wow, you're super spiritual. Trust me, if you knew me, you wouldn't say that. But the thing is that, providentially God put that in place. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to work on the intentionality piece. And now I'm going to break you out. This one's a little bit more private, and I want to break you out for a few minutes. And I just want you to look through those 5 circles and say, put a name associates, or start to put some names in some of those places. So jump in. We'll give you a few minutes. I want you to start to get an intentional plan. Who do you care about? Go. All right, you hanging with me? Yeah, I hope you are. I promise, no more exercises. Actually, I just lied. There'll be one more. But it's not till the end, so you can still, leave. Number 4, subgrouping is key to getting groups ready for reaching new people. Subgrouping is key to getting groups ready to reach new people. Now, we got some great drawings right there, and I want to just kind of explain subgrouping for you a little bit. Subgrouping is just simply raising the conversation level with people. But if you're intentional enough, it not only raises the conversation with people, but it also kind of helps develop people that can lead conversations. And guess what's needed for evangelism? Conversations. So there's a trifecta thing that can be happening with this subgrouping that I just want to cue you in on. If you look at your diagram on your page right there, you see that there's a place where you can start together, and then when you can subgroup during your small group time, and then you can bring everybody back together to stop. And subgrouping basically is if you have over 8 people, we would recommend that during the sharing time that you kind of break up into smaller groups so that people can talk. So there is the component where we use subgrouping to be able to help quiet people be able to talk and dominant people to be able just to, pipe down just a little bit. But there's also a piece right here where you can do some strategy pieces. And this is where I want to walk with you, because part of evangelism or meeting friends is getting more groups ready. And if you look there, there's a strategy where you can raise future leaders. Now, if I went to probably any person in this room and I said, would you lead a group for us? More times than not, people would say no versus yes. Why? Mainly they would say, I'm too busy, or they're unsure of what the commitment level is, or they feel unqualified, or they're just like going, I'm just the wrong type of person. But one of the things that you can do when you subgroup inside your group is that you can use a strategy to be able to develop people to realize that they may be more of a leader than they think. So we have 3 S's that kind of touch on with these people. And the first one is a sentence. What you want to be able to do, if you're leading a group and you subgroup, don't ask them ahead of time. Just spring it on them. Trust me, do the surprise attack. But, if you're leading a group and there's somebody that you think could be a future leader, what you want to do is be able to say, hey, let's subgroup during this conversation time and just go, hey, Sue, I've got this one sentence right here. And could you just read it to your people? I'm going to take some people into another room. You read it. Could you just kind of discuss it and see what's happening? Well, I can guarantee you she'll just do it. You've typed it out. You're just saying read a sentence. Then what you want to do over time is be able to maybe type out 2 or 3 discussion questions and be able to say, hey, Sue, would you mind just doing it a little bit longer? It's a little bit simpler. It's just like a sentence, and it's a little bit more complex, but not too much more. Instead of doing 1 question, you're going to do 2 or 3. And can you just make sure everybody talks and everybody discusses? Again, you don't have to tell her ahead of time or him ahead of time, but you just want to do is just, in the moment, you can probably make it happen. Now, there's always the person out there that says, well, what if they say no? Well, that's okay too. Just go, would anybody in the group want to read this one sentence? Because, Sue is, too stage fright and doesn't want to believe God that she can read the sentence. I'm sorry, that was way too much guilt, but we won't do that. But just say, hey, is there anybody else that would want to take this? And you never know. Somebody may volunteer and say, I'll lead it, and go through that. So you start with a sentence, you move to a section, and then pretty soon you can, pull Sue aside and just say, hey, I'd like you to try and lead a study together. We'll keep the whole group together. I'll be there right beside you. But I would like, you to maybe lead the study through. And could we go with that? You'd be surprised how many people sit in a group thinking they can never lead a discussion, but if you give them a crawl, walk, run, step, they'll be more leaders than you could think through inside your own group. The other thing too there is on the flip side, we have 3 M's. And that is when you do subgroup with people, sociologists tell us when we walk into a room, within 90 seconds, we kind of know who we want to sit with or who we want to talk to. And so when you do this, when you start the subgroup, make it harder on you as the leader, easier on them. And just be able to say, hey, Sue, could you stay here? And a couple of you stay, and a couple of you go with me, and we'll go into another room and do these questions. So you're just kind of mixing it up, and you can trade in and you can trade out. But what you can do is when you leave it up to the group, you'll start to see certain people want to stay, in this case, with Sue. So you would want to start to be intentional when you subgroup. So if there's 2 couples that want to stay with Sue all the time, what you can do is to say, hey, we're going to subgroup right now, and you 2 couples, you can be kind of hanging together. I want you to stay with Sue, and I'll take the rest of the crew with me. It won't be long when these people will start to build up together. They'll build some chemistry together. And then you can talk with Sue about doing some of the strategies and tactics that we talk about in building biblical health with her group of people. And when she does that long enough, you'd be surprised that you don't have to move them out, but they'll start to be able to do it on their own. Again, I'm just saying you don't have to push them out, but what I'm saying is be strategic when you're doing subgrouping. Start to realize that is a great way to raise new leaders. If you look at the call out at the bottom of the box, it says, the incubation of leaders in the small group is a key strategy to reaching your community. Because the people in your group will start to get to know other people in the community, and they'll start to be able to say, hey, I could grab them, and to be able to start a group. Let's turn over to the next point right there. And it says, recognize there will always be challenges to do evangelism in small groups. There will always be challenges. Now, why? Why is evangelism always so tough? Because if truly community is how we're wired, why would evangelism be so tough in groups? A couple things right here. One is because the tension between fellowship and evangelism. There's a high desire to build deep fellowship, but yet on the same way, there's a big piece of doing evangelism. So let me share this point with you. In our culture, evangelism is a principle. How we do evangelism has to be figured out. If you were in America and you were traveling to a foreign country, you would never take an American idiom overseas because it wouldn't be cross-cultural. In the same way, we have adopted many strategies from other cultures to do evangelism in our small groups. And what they do is they violate the cultural problems that we have with fellowship here in America. Now, most strategies for evangelism in small groups is rapid cell multiplication. And if you don't know anything about it, that's fine. If you do, there's no problem if it works. But what I have found is that trying to take a group, divide them up for the cause of Christ, and then have those groups divide up and then have those groups divide up tends to work against our American culture. Why? Because at least in Southern California, we're in the 4th or 5th generation of divorced families producing divorced families. I was driving my daughter home just a few years back, and part of their assignment they were doing was they had to draw their family tree. And one of Erica's girlfriends was in the back seat, and she was just going, this is such a hard assignment. She goes, I have 3 dads, and I have so many stepkids and stepmoms, and she goes, it is just really just a tricky assignment because our culture is a little fragmented. For the first time in Southern California in the 2010 census, the nuclear family is in the minority to the step family. That's not a bad thing. It's just part of where culture is at. More kids are raised in a step family than a traditional nuclear family of one mom and one dad. I mean, it's not unusual for me sometimes where I've done a wedding and I've got 4 parents on both sides of the bride and groom. It's not, again, it's not good and bad. It's just where culture is at. Then you also add into that we're a very transient culture. And that is that sometimes there are, like for me, I have 4 brothers and a sister, and all of us live in a different state. So there's a transient. So when fellowship is broken up, there is a hard time to do evangelism. Now, question, does that mean that we don't do evangelism? No. We just have to figure out how to do evangelism. And so part of how to do evangelism is just realizing that you need to keep personal evangelism high in your group. When you keep personal evangelism high in your group, what happens is your group doesn't stay focused on themselves. Now, hear me clearly. At Saddleback Church, we launch our groups for life. But we keep personal evangelism high. It doesn't mean that those people, come into that group. They may, but we just have to keep personal evangelism high. The classic thing is on cliques. Cliques aren't bad. Cliques are only bad is if they exclude people that they don't care about other people outside their clique. Every one of us, whether we like it or not, live in a clique. Jesus had his quote-unquote clique of Peter, James, and John inside the 12 disciples. A clique is not bad unless you don't care about the people around you. So to do evangelism in your groups, you just have to recognize that it has challenges. The how-tos can be what we've listed here. For some of it, you can be, just an open group. There are people that want to invite people all the time. But if you are a closed group, just be open to keeping personal evangelism high in your group, not necessarily to invite to your group, but to, keep the evangelism piece high. And then the other thing too is during a campaign for us, is that during a campaign, we challenge our groups to be able to say, has God brought new friends into your life where you may want to start a new group? So when you look at evangelism in groups, understand it has challenges, but there are tactical ways to do it. The next point right there is you also want to develop strategies for evangelism in your group. We've listed a number of them there, but let me highlight a couple that may not make sense to you. The second one down says group versus individual approach. I have found that sometimes when your group goes to events together, you can do evangelism better, or you feel more confident. So like if we have a block party on our street or somebody else's, we can invite our small group to that so that people can start to get to know other followers of Christ who aren't weird. There's also things where, if you're going to parties and things like that, sometimes you can invite some people from your group. Again, to keep the group approach, you can sometimes find securities there. Then down about 6 or 7 says honor core relationships, and that's subgroups. Sometimes groups will feel during a campaign like they can go out and start a new group with other people that are like-minded with them. And so that's what we mean by honor core groups. Now, the bottom line is there's many ways to do evangelism. Don't get stuck on one way, but what I would encourage you to do is keep the relational piece very, very high. Look at some of the scriptures there. In Acts 20:24, it says, I don't care about my own life, but the most important thing is that I complete my mission, the work that the Lord gave me to tell, circle that phrase, to tell people the good news about God's grace. John 17 says, in the same way that you gave me a mission to the world, I give them, circle that phrase, I give them a mission to the world. And then, of course, the Great Commission in Matthew 28:19 says, go. Circle the word go. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. Now, I get it. Some people are like going, hey, I don't like, this whole part about going. Well, talk to Jesus. I'm not saying it. None of your pastors are saying it. Jesus is saying it. So if you have a problem, check it up with Jesus. And then our last point right here is have a curriculum strategy. And we've listed some small group curriculums that you can have right there. What I would encourage you to do is to make sure, either with your church polity or things that your church is used to, if you're going to have people, if you want to keep evangelism high, you got to keep the resources available to your people. And don't make them go out on the internet and find it, because that's going to be a lot of ugly. What you want to do is give them a list of what you would recommend to them. Now, again, what I want to do is to touch base back in with your planners. I want to encourage you to turn to your group game plan and also your church's game plan, and kind of spend some time, think about evangelism. We've kind of broken it up a little bit there for you, both personal, local, and global evangelism on both of them. But what you do is turn into that and spend some time and just get a taste of what that may look like, both for your group and your church. So jump into your planners.